Imagine a small cafe in London. Tuesday morning, raindrops are gently tapping on the windows. In the corner, a man is sitting. He has been there for 40 minutes. He hasn't ordered anything. He hasn't looked at his phone. His coat is neatly folded across the empty chair beside him, while everyone else has hung their coats on the hook by the door. He is watching the entrance, not with the obvious, curious gaze of a tourist, but with a practiced stillness. His body appears completely relaxed, but his mind is running at full operational speed. His name is not important. What is important is this. He has already built a complete profile of the 11 people sitting in this room, and not a single one of them knows that his eyes are on them. This is not a scene from a movie. This is reality. This is the science of the hidden self, the language of behavior that all of us speak every moment, without even realizing it. In today's video, we are going to see through the eyes of this intelligence analyst just how much humans leak. A micro-expression, a breath hold, a handshake, or even doing nothing at all. Everything is data. If you think you hide your emotions and secrets really well, then this video is going to permanently change that belief of yours. Let's step inside behavioral baseline. The first thing any credible intelligence training program teaches is the concept of baseline behavior. Before you can identify an anomaly, you must understand the norm. A person who normally speaks quickly, gestures broadly, and makes sustained eye contact is not being aggressive when they do these things. That is simply their operating rhythm. But the moment that same person falls suddenly quiet, reduces their gestures, and begins breaking eye contact with brief downward glances, something has shifted internally. Something has been triggered. The baseline has broken. And in the intelligence world, a broken baseline is not a curiosity, it is a signal. Consider what happens inside a human body the moment a person processes something emotionally charged. The amygdala, that ancient reptilian core of the brain, fires before conscious thought can intervene. Blood pressure shifts. Micro-muscle groups around the eyes and mouth contract or release in patterns so rapid they last between 1/15th and 1/25th of a second. These are micro-expressions, first cataloged in rigorous scientific detail by psychologist Paul Ekman, and they are entirely involuntary. A person can train themselves to suppress a full emotional expression, but they cannot stop the initial flash. The body always speaks first. The mind catches up later and tries to edit the broadcast, but by then, anyone who is truly watching has already received the transmission. In a recruitment scenario documented by a former Western intelligence agency, the details altered for operational security. A foreign diplomat was invited to a series of informal dinner events at an embassy. He was charming, composed, decorated by decades of professional diplomacy. On the surface, an impeccable subject. But during one dinner, when a junior attaché casually mentioned the name of a city in his home country, a city the diplomat had no known connection to, there was a pause, not a dramatic pause. A half-second breath hold, followed by a micro-compression of the lips that lasted less time than it takes to blink. Then he laughed warmly, redirected the conversation, and continued charming the room. The analyst, watching from across the table, noted it on a napkin. 6 months later, that city turned out to be the location of a clandestine financial operation the diplomat had been running for 4 years. The napkin note became part of a classified file. The handshake. Most people believe a handshake is a greeting. Intelligence practitioners know it is an examination. In the roughly 2 seconds of a standard handshake, a trained observer extracts a remarkable volume of information. The temperature and moisture level of the palm reveals autonomic nervous system activity. A cold, dry hand in a warm room often indicates sustained low-level anxiety or hypervigilance. The grip pressure communicates something about the person's social dominance, orientation, and how rehearsed they are in controlling their self-presentation. The duration of eye contact during the shake, whether it is sustained, broken early, or exaggerated, tells you how the person has been told to appear, which is different from how they actually are. The angle of the hand, whether they attempt to rotate yours, subtly palm up. Establishing unconscious dominance reveals how they naturally default in power dynamics. Perhaps most revealing of all is what happens in the microsecond before the physical contact. The body anticipates. The arms adjust. The weight shifts. A person who is genuinely comfortable will close the physical distance at a steady pace. A person who is concealing something or who feels socially exposed will often perform a barely perceptible hesitation. A deceleration in the final foot of approach. It registers almost as enthusiasm interrupted. The trained eye catches it as preparation, the body managing an internal state before the performance begins. None of this is magic. None of it is intuition in the mystical sense. It is pattern recognition built on a deep, operational understanding of what normal human beings do when they are at ease and what they do when they are not. The analyst in the cafe corner has this embedded in his perceptual system the way a chess grandmaster has the opening moves of 10,000 games embedded in memory. He does not consciously think through each signal. He feels the aggregate. He calls it reading the temperature of a person. Elicitation. There is a technique used in intelligence work and advanced social engineering that most people will never identify being used on them, even as it unfolds in real time. It is called elicitation. The art of extracting information from a person without them realizing they are providing it. Unlike interrogation, which carries the weight of pressure and confrontation, elicitation is conversational, warm, and almost indistinguishable from ordinary human connection. The subject does not feel interviewed. They feel understood. The foundational mechanic is deceptively simple. Human beings are compulsively drawn to complete, incomplete narratives. If someone makes a confident but slightly incorrect statement about a subject the listener knows well, the listener will almost always correct it, and in doing so, provide accurate information they had no intention of volunteering. A trained elicitor at a conference might say to a defense contractor's employee, "I heard your company's prototype failed the first round of testing in Nevada." If the employee knows the truth, the impulse to defend and correct is overwhelming. No, the Nevada trial was fine. It was the Arizona deployment that had the power supply issue. The elicitor now knows where the prototype was actually deployed and what kind of failure occurred. They expressed mild surprise, thanked him warmly, and moved on. The employee had no idea he had just briefed a stranger on classified information because it felt like normal conversation. It felt like connection. It felt like being heard. Flattery is another elicitation tool, but not in the crude sense of empty compliments. The sophisticated version is what behavioral researchers call acknowledgement of expertise. When a person's professional identity is recognized and elevated, they naturally expand into that recognition. They become generous with knowledge. They demonstrate mastery. The person being elicited feels respected and seen, two of the most powerful psychological states a human being can experience, and this emotional warmth opens conversational doors that suspicion would normally keep shut. The feeling of being truly understood is so rare in ordinary human experience that most people will unconsciously lower their guard entirely in its presence. The eye and the voice-eye movement, when properly contextualized, is a window into cognitive processing. This is not about the debunked pseudoscience of neurolinguistic programming's oversimplified directional claims. It is about something more nuanced and more reliable. When a person is genuinely recalling a memory, their eye movements, blink rate, and pupil dilation follow patterns that differ measurably from the patterns produced when they are constructing a narrative in real time. Memory retrieval has a different cognitive signature from creative fabrication. The difference is subtle, but it is consistent enough across subjects that trained behavioral analysts use it as one data point in a larger mosaic of signals. The voice is equally revealing, perhaps more so. Because most people believe they can control their vocal presentation far better than they actually can. Speech rate is one of the most responsive channels to emotional state. When a person is calm and confident, their speech has a natural rhythm, moderate pacing, and minimal self-interruption. when a question activates an emotional hotspot, a topic that generates anxiety. Guilt or fear. The speech rate often shifts before the words themselves do. There is a micropause, sometimes less than a full second, that precedes the verbal response. To the untrained ear, it registers as thoughtfulness. To someone who has been listening to the rhythm of this particular voice for 30 minutes, it registers as something landing differently. Voice pitch rises involuntarily under stress, driven by the contraction of the laryngeal muscles responding to cortisol and adrenaline. Swallowing frequency increases when a person is managing a strong emotional response because the parasympathetic system diverts attention inward. These are not signals that require expensive equipment to detect. They require attention, genuine, patient, sustained attention of the kind that most people never offer each other in ordinary conversation because they are too busy preparing what they themselves are going to say next. The intelligence operative's greatest professional advantage is not access to technology. It is the willingness to be completely, devastatingly present. The absence speaks. One of the most counterintuitive insights of behavioral analysis is this: the absence of a behavior is often more significant than its presence. In a room full of people reacting with visible agitation to an unexpected announcement, the person who shows no reaction at all is the most interesting person in the room. Emotional flatness in a context that provokes emotion is itself an emotional signal. It suggests suppression, prior knowledge, or extreme compartmentalization, all of which warrant a second look. A senior analyst who worked asset recruitment for nearly 15 years described it this way: when everyone around a person is behaving in a way that makes emotional sense given the circumstances, and one person is not, that is your signal. Not guilt necessarily, but something. That person knows something the others do not, or they have already processed something the others are just now encountering. Either way, they become the center of your attention. This principle extends far beyond espionage. In ordinary life, the friend who does not ask any questions when you share dramatic news may understand far more than they are revealing. The colleague who seems entirely unmoved by an announcement that shocks the rest of the office may have received it through a different channel first. The partner who responds to an accusation not with denial, but with an immediate posed pivot to talking about your feelings. A technique called deflection through emotional reversal has likely prepared for this conversation in advance. The absence of the expected response is data. The presence of a too smooth, too prepared response is data. Everything is data once you learn to read the field. If you are finding this story insightful, if it is changing the way you look at the ordinary moments of your day, make sure to like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment with what you just realized about yourself or someone around you. Your awareness is the beginning of everything. The mirror there is a moment in any deep intelligence operation, the kind that unfolds over months, rather than minutes when the operative must become genuinely trusted by the target. Not performing trust, earning it. And the mechanics of how human trust is built reveal something extraordinary and slightly unsettling about the nature of human connection itself. The most powerful trust-building tool in the behavioral sciences is behavioral mirroring, and it works because of the way the human brain processes sameness. When another person moves the way you move, uses the vocabulary you use, adopts the tempo of your speech, and reflects back your emotional register, your brain does not consciously register the synchrony, but it feels it at a subcortical level. It fires the neural circuitry associated with familiarity and safety. This person feels like me, the brain concludes. And because they feel like me, they are probably safe. They probably understand me. They might even be like me in ways I haven't yet discovered. That feeling of being genuinely, deeply understood is one of the rarest and most intoxicating experiences available to a social animal. Experienced intelligence operatives know that it is also one of the fastest ways to lower a human being's defensive architecture. In a documented case from a European intelligence operation in the early 2000s, public in broad strokes, Classified in specifics, an operative was tasked with building a close relationship with a mid-level government official suspected of passing information to a foreign power. The operative did not approach him with charm or pressure. Instead, over the course of 4 months of carefully engineered social proximity, she simply paid extraordinary attention to how he communicated. She learned that he used spatial metaphors when he was excited. "I can see the whole picture now. We're close to the edge of something important." She learned that he became most expansive and generous in conversation. In the half hour after his third coffee, she learned that his deepest professional insecurity was that he believed his analytical work was undervalued by people with more political savvy. She never exploited any of this overtly. She simply made herself the one person in his life who seemed to naturally understand the full picture of who he was. By month 4, he was voluntarily telling her things he had never told his wife. The relationship felt, to him, like the most genuine of his adult life. He never once suspected that every detail of it had been architecturally constructed around the specific contours of his psychology. The self-deceiver, perhaps the most profound and most personally confronting element of behavioral psychology, is what it reveals about self-deception. Human beings are not simply capable of deceiving others, they are remarkably, consistently capable of deceiving themselves. And this self-deception is not a character flaw or a moral failing. It is a cognitive survival mechanism baked into the operating system of the human mind, designed to protect the ego from truths that might destabilize the self-concept. People who study human behavior for a living will tell you that the stated reason for a person's action and the actual reason for that action are, in a surprising proportion of cases, not the same thing. The person who says they left a job because of the commute often left because they felt invisible. The person who says they ended a relationship because of incompatibility often ended it because they were afraid of what becoming truly known would cost them. The executive who says they hired a particular candidate because of their qualifications often hired them because something in the candidate's behavioral style mirrored their own, and the familiar felt like competence. We narrate our own lives with ourselves as rational protagonists making deliberate choices. The behavioral record tells a different story. In intelligence assessments, this gap between stated intention and real intention is known as the delta, the distance between what someone says they want and what their behavioral pattern actually reveals they are seeking. Mapping the delta of a target is considered one of the most sophisticated tasks in psychological profiling, because it requires the analyst to look past the narrative the subject has constructed about themselves and identify the emotional need driving their behavior beneath the surface. A diplomat who claims to be motivated by patriotism, but whose behavioral record shows a consistent pattern of seeking external validation, personal recognition, and peer status is not primarily a patriot. He is someone whose deepest need is to matter. That need is his vulnerability. And vulnerability, in the architecture of influence, is the door through which everything else enters. Posture and the unspoken contract body posture communicates a continuous, real-time broadcast of a person's internal state and their relationship to the people around them. The open torso, chest forward, arms uncrossed, weight evenly distributed signals confidence and receptivity. The closed torso, arms crossed, shoulders rounded inward. Weight shifted to one foot in preparation for withdrawal signals, either psychological discomfort or a deliberate performance of disengagement. Neither signal is absolute on its own, but both are meaningful in the context of the specific interaction and the individual's behavioral baseline. What is less commonly understood is the way bodies orient in space relative to the person they are most engaged with or most threatened by. In a group conversation, individuals unconsciously angle their feet toward the person they find most compelling, regardless of who they are making eye contact with. This foot-pointing behavior is so automatic that most people cannot suppress it even when they know it is being observed, is one of the most reliable indicators of genuine interest or concern in a social situation. The person whose torso is oriented toward you but whose feet point toward the exit is already planning their departure. emotionally, if not physically. During a hostage negotiation training scenario, one of several used by a major law enforcement agency to simulate the behavioral dynamics of high-stakes influence, a negotiator in training was told to observe a player pretending to be in a state of controlled calm. Within 3 minutes, the trainee identified that the role player's left shoulder was held approximately 2 centimeters higher than the right, a pattern consistent with sustained muscular tension in the trapezius, typically associated with suppressed fear or anger. The role player's breathing was also thoracic rather than diaphragmatic, another autonomic signal of elevated physiological arousal. The surface presentation was composed. The body was in distress. The trainee had learned to listen to the body instead of the performance. The digital body in the modern era, the behavioral body, has extended into digital space. And the signals it leaks there are, if anything, even more revealing than those generated in physical interaction. The language a person uses in emails and messages, the frequency of hedging words, the length of time before they respond to an uncomfortable question, the topics they volunteer unprompted versus those they respond to only when asked, all constitute a behavioral signature as distinct as a fingerprint. Intelligence agencies have known this for decades. They have built entire analytical frameworks around digital behavioral profiling that make the handshake. Analysis in a cafe look like archaeology. What most people do not appreciate is that their digital behavior is not just visible to institutions. It is readable by any attentive human being who shares. Their communications. The colleague who always responds to your emails within minutes but took 4 hours to respond to one particular message has told you something important. The friend who normally uses exclamation marks liberally but answered your last question in a single flat sentence has shifted emotional temperature. The person who messages you in detailed paragraphs but responded to one specific inquiry with a 2-word answer has just drawn a boundary around a topic, whether or not they consciously intended to. The digital record is a behavioral record, and behavioral records, unlike stated intentions, are very difficult to falsify consistently over time. The organizations that understand this most deeply, the intelligence services, the major data analytics firms, the behavioral research institutions, have moved well beyond simple keyword monitoring. They analyze the emotional valence of language, the syntactic patterns that indicate cognitive load, the timing distributions of communications that reveal circadian and stress rhythms. They are not just reading what you say. They are reading how you say it, when you say it, what you choose not to say, and the gap between how your language describes your life and what the behavioral pattern of your communications actually suggests is happening in it. They are reading your delta. The highest intelligence, the man in the cafe corner, eventually ordered an espresso. Not because he wanted one, he had stopped drinking coffee years ago. After a cardiac event at 43 that had rearranged his relationship with stimulants. But because a person who has been sitting for over an hour without consuming anything begins to generate their own signal, they become the anomaly. And the most important operational principle he had ever been taught was this: the observer must never become the thing being observed. Invisibility is not about disappearing. It is about fitting so precisely into the expected pattern of an environment that the eye slides over you without catching. He watched a young woman near the window check her phone 17 times in 20 minutes. Not scrolling, checking. Locking, pausing, unlocking, checking. The pattern was not boredom. It was anticipation layered with anxiety. She was waiting for a specific message from a specific person, and the message had not come. And the absence of it was doing something to her internal state that she was managing through the ritual of the phone. He noted the repeated self-touch, her fingers going to her collarbone, then to her earring, then to her collarbone again. Self-soothing gestures. The body medicating the emotional system through proprioceptive feedback. She was not in danger. She was not a subject of any intelligence interest. She was simply a human being, broadcasting the full complexity of her interior life through a behavior she had no awareness she was performing. That is the thing about behavioral literacy that most people never quite emotionally process, even when they intellectually understand it. It is not about surveillance in the sinister sense. It is about the fact that we are all always speaking. Not with words, with everything else. The slight forward lean, that means you believe what you are hearing. The brief look away, that means something just landed uncomfortably. The small smile that appears not in response to what was said, but to a private thought triggered by it. The tension in the jaw that suggests you are holding something unsaid. The moment when your breathing changed because the conversation touched something real. We move through our days believing we are opaque, believing that our interior lives are ours alone, private, protected by the wall of our skin and the performance of our social face. What behavioral science, and the people trained in its deepest applications, reveals is that we have never been opaque. We have always been a transmission. Continuous, detailed, and largely unencrypted. The question is not whether you are broadcasting. Its question is who is listening, and whether you will choose, finally, to listen to yourself. The highest intelligence is not the ability to read others. It is the willingness to read yourself with the same unflinching precision, to notice the moment your breathing shifts, to catch the micro-expression that crosses your own face in the mirror before you arrange it into the version you intended, to feel the emotional hotspot that a question activates in you before your mind has had time to construct a rational explanation for why you feel nothing, to observe your own delta, the gap between who you say you are and what your behavioral record actually suggests about who you are becoming. Because here is the thing that the man in the cafe corner has come to understand. After a decade of reading everyone else, the most surveilled person in your life is not a target in a classified file. It is you, surveilled by the version of yourself that already knows the truth you are still in the process of admitting. That interior observer is always watching, always noting the inconsistencies between your stated intentions and your revealed behavior, always waiting for you to stop performing and start paying attention. Nothing in human behavior is random. Every gesture has a grammar. Every silence has a syntax. Every room you walk into, you are already speaking before you open your mouth. The real question, the only question that ultimately matters, is whether you will become fluent in the language. You have been speaking your entire life without knowing it.